Welcome back, scholars. Settle in, because today's lecture, Lecture 16 on declarative clauses and speech acts, is honestly one of my absolute favorites. We are diving into a concept today that completely flipped the field of linguistics right on its head. We grow up thinking of speaking as just communicating information, right? Like language is just a passive mirror reflecting the world around us. But today, we're going on a little journey into pragmatics to discover that speaking isn't just communicating. Speaking is actually doing. By the end of this explainer, I promise you, you are never going to look at a simple everyday sentence the exact same way again. All right, let's quickly run through today's syllabus. We'll start with 1, the deceptive declarative clause. Then 2, Austin, Searle, and speech acts. 3, Searle's taxonomy. 4, form versus communicative function. 5, felicity conditions. And finally, 6, the complexity of context. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The deceptive declarative clause, the illusion of simplicity. So think about your basic run-of-the-mill sentence, something like, the cat jumps. Traditionally, linguistic study drew a very hard line between syntax, the actual arrangement of words, and semantics, the meaning of those words. And in that rigid traditional view, the declarative clause is basically the default sentence type. Structurally, it's super predictable. You've got a subject that comes right before the verb, the classic subject-verb-object setup. So if I tell you, Tom gave Pauline a digital watch for her birthday, we've got a clear subject in Tom, a verb in gave, and objects that make this incredibly neat, tidy assertion about an event that happened. For a very long time, linguists basically believed the whole point of these clauses was just to make statements about the world. Statements you could neatly label as either true or false. But language is way more devious than that. Which brings us to Section 2, Austin, Searle, and speech acts, the pragmatic disruption. Okay, read this quote and let it really sink in. To speak is to perform an action. This right here is the absolute cornerstone of speech act theory. It was pioneered by J.L. Austin and later fine-tuned by John Searle. And guys, they completely revolutionized how we understand language by proving that words go way, way beyond their literal dictionary definitions. Language doesn't just sit there and describe reality, it actively intervenes in it. When you open your mouth to speak, you are not just some passive observer painting a little picture with vocabulary. You are an actor. You are pulling levers and actively changing the world around you. Let's make sure we have a formal definition for our notes. A speech act is defined as an action that is carried out through a linguistic expression. Think about this for a second. When you look someone dead in the eye and say, "I promise," you aren't describing a promise that's just floating around out there in the universe. The actual physical act of saying those words is the promise itself. You are literally creating a real-world commitment through the sheer force of your utterance. You're acting upon the world. And that underlying intent and power behind your words, in linguistics, we call that the illocutionary force of the statement. Moving right along to Section 3, Searle's taxonomy classifying illocutionary force. So John Searle took Austin's foundational ideas and basically gave us a filing system. He grouped speech acts into 5 distinct classes based on their illocutionary point. We have representatives, where you commit to the truth of something, like stating a fact. Directives, where you're trying to get the listener to do something, think requests or commands. We have commissives, which we'll unpack in just a second. Declarations, which literally alter reality. And expressives, which reveal your internal state. Let's look at some real-world examples to make this concrete. First step, commissives. A commissive speech act essentially locks the speaker into a future course of action. When you make a promise or take a pledge, swear a vow, or even just offer a guarantee, you are legally or socially binding your future self to a specific behavior. The language itself is the binding agent. The illocutory force happening here is obligation. Next, we have expressives. These are fascinating because they reveal the speaker's internal psychological state or attitude. If someone says, "I'm sorry," that's not just a flat description of the world. It is the active, real-time expression of regret for a wrongdoing. The action taking place is the emotional unburdening, right? It's the social repair that the words are actively facilitating between two people. And hey, expressives aren't just for apologies and negative stuff. Expressing joy through congratulations is another perfect everyday example. When you walk up to a friend and say, "Congratulations," you are actively performing the social act of celebrating their achievement. You are validating them right then and there. Now, here is where things get really intense. Enter declarations. These are the high-stakes speech acts. When a judge bangs a gavel and says, "I sentence you to 10 years," or an officiant says, "I declare you husband and wife," or a priest baptizes a child, the state of affairs, the actual institutional reality of our world, is instantly altered just by those words being spoken. The very millisecond that sentence ends, reality has fundamentally shifted. It's almost like magic. Let's look at Section 4, Form versus Communicative Function Beyond the Literal Meaning. Now, I want to show you how slippery language can actually be. Let's look at how the exact same declarative clause can completely transform its illocutionary force just by tweaking the intonation. You have that standard, rigid subject-verb structure, it is raining. But if you just raise your pitch at the end, it's raining, your simple declarative has suddenly morphed into an inquiry. If you use a high tone and shout, it's raining, well, now it's an exclamation of surprise. The grammatical form hasn't budged an inch, but the communicative function is totally fluid. In fact, a declarative can even function as a directive or a performative, depending entirely on the context and maybe the specific modal auxiliaries you use. Imagine your manager looks at you and says, "You will report to the head office tomorrow." Grammatically speaking, that is a statement of future fact. But pragmatically, come on, that is a command. It is a directive. Or think about explicit performative verbs. I advise you to see a doctor. The literal act of advising is executed the exact moment the sentence is uttered. All right, Section 5, Understanding Felicity Conditions, the rules of the game. Because here's the thing, you can't just go around saying words and magically changing reality without following the rules. For a speech act to actually be successful, it has to meet what linguists call felicity conditions. There are 3 core tiers we look at. First, preparatory conditions. Basically, are the circumstances appropriate and do the people speaking actually have the authority to do so? Second, sincerity conditions. Does the speaker actually hold the beliefs and intentions they're expressing? And third, essential conditions. Does the utterance actually count as the intended act by both parties involved? If even one of these fails, the speech act completely misfires. It's void. It's really helpful to see how these conditions apply differently depending on the scenario. Take the marriage declaration. Its prefatory condition strictly requires that it be performed by an authorized person. I can't just walk up to 2 random strangers waiting at a bus stop and pronounce them married. The speech act would misfire. It wouldn't count. Conversely, look at the apology. Its sincerity condition demands that the speaker genuinely regrets the offense. If you roll your eyes and say, "I'm sorry," sarcastically, your grammar is perfectly correct, but pragmatically, the apology has totally failed because that sincerity condition wasn't met. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, the complexity of context, pulling it all together. You see, language doesn't happen in a vacuum. The illocutionary force of any declarative clause relies incredibly heavily on this massive, invisible web of shared knowledge, cultural norms, precise intonation, and speaker intent. It is incredibly layered and complex. Think about second language learners. They often struggle not with the vocabulary itself, but because they transfer speech act patterns from their native language that just don't carry the same illocutionary force in their new language. Meaning is quite literally co-created in the space between the speaker, the listener, and the environment. So I want to end our explainer today with a bit of a challenge for you, my scholars. If speaking is truly doing, how many of your daily conversations are actually indirect speech acts cleverly disguised as simple statements? The next time you hear someone say, "Well, it's cold in here," stop and ask yourself, are they really just making a declarative observation about the room temperature? Or are they issuing a hidden directive, asking you to go close the window? Start analyzing the hidden illocutionary forces in everything you say and hear. It'll completely change how you see the world. Class dismissed.